So I'd been asked to become president of a small graduate school, which had been founded by a Dominican priest. You start the day with yoga, Tai Chi, something that animates the body. And then 3 hours of lecture. Then you go into 3 hours of art. And then you conclude the day with integration. And I thought, now that is interesting. The current paradigm, to put it really succinctly, creates sociopaths. That's why we're on the verge of destroying ourselves. I don't think diversity and inclusion are values. Love is a value. Doing good to others is a value. It was an IBM study. And the conclusion was there wasn't a single educational institution, Richard, that was preparing young people to cope and navigate through hypercomplexity. AI is just out there without any value proposition. We're going to go off the cliff, ladies and gentlemen.
What's the first step out of the materialist paradigm? And welcome to another episode of Being Human. I'm delighted to say I'm here with Jim Garrison. Jim is a scholar with extensive studies in history and philosophy. He's also been this side of the pond, got his PhD at Cambridge, as I understand, and is the founder of Ubiquity University, which fuses inner development with systems thinking, social innovation. And I have, I suppose, this body of knowledge is something I've been searching for a long time. A place where people are fusing the inner work with the outer concern for organizations and systems. So as I was speaking to you before we came on, I had Peter Murray on the show, who's also worked with Ubiquity University. So to now have the founder here, to have you here, Jim, is a great treat. And I'm delighted that you've agreed to do this. You've also been an activist. And what caught my attention particularly very recently was your interest in the phenomena of UFOs. And so, I'd love to get into that. So there's so much to cover. And thanks once again for coming on the show.
With pleasure.
Great. So let's take you back. I mean, I'd love to hear the story of Ubiquity University and the founding of that, and how you brought these disparate interests together, and really what the overall vision and purpose was when you started out with it.
Well, good. Well, thank you. Well, I've been one of those students, I think, in my entire educational career that lasted till I was 32. I don't think I missed more than a handful of classes, and that was only because I was deathly ill um, in the entire time. I love school. I love to read. I love to learn. I'd go to class eager, and I really enjoyed the educational experience. Then I had the real privilege of doing graduate work at both Harvard and at Cambridge. And what was astonishing to me, Richard, I don't know what I thought about Harvard and Cambridge, but I thought, this has got to be the apex of
Absolutely.
learning. And they were positively medieval. The learning method was basically based on memorization of facts and how well you can regurgitate what you've memorized on tests.
Right.
And that's true from the first grade through the PhD. PhD, they give you a little bit of leeway because you have to write a dissertation. But, at Cambridge, they send you a form which tells you even the color of your socks when you go for your oral exam. So when one thinks of education, certainly in the Western world, one has to come to the conclusion that it is based on some of the most primitive pedagogical models known. I mean, it's a matter of record, scientific record, that most students forget upwards of 80% of everything they've memorized for a test within 30 days of taking the test. So when you memorize something, you're activating your short-term memory. You're not activating your wisdom. You're not activating your capacity to integrate. So I had a son. My oldest son was an artist, brilliantly creative and three-dimensional, and they put him through that little narrow memorize homework, and he anguished and he suffered all the way through school. And then the day of his 18th birthday, he quit school. And he says, "This is nonsense. I'm not going to do this." And he's turned out to be a very successful artist, makes a good living, and so forth and so on. But it was within that context that I thought, wow, wait, man, there's got to be a different way. So I'd been asked to become president of a small graduate school called the University of Creation Spirituality, which had been founded by a Dominican priest, Matthew Fox. And he had built a pedagogical model based on four things. Number one, you start the day with somatic practice, yoga, tai chi, something that animates the body. And then you go into 3 hours of lecture, take a break. Then you go into 3 hours of art. And then you conclude the day, number four, with integration. And I thought, now that is interesting. That is interesting. And so after a number of years refining the pedagogy, we decided to transition into Ubiquity University. And when we did that, I had met Peter Mary,
Ah,
uh, you had referenced at the beginning of the program. And Peter was brilliant. And he wanted to be the chief innovation officer of the company because we created Ubiquity University as a for-profit social benefit corporation, a B Corp. And so he came up with Plato's truth, beauty, and goodness.
mm,
Explore. You want to know what the truth is? You want to equip. You want to become beautiful. You want to engage in personal development. You want to learn the interior journey. And you want to engage. You want to do good in the world.
right.
So Ubiquity University was founded on Plato's trinity of virtues, truth, beauty, and goodness. And it has kept us in good stead ever since. We're the only academic institution at the graduate level that requires of all of our students what we call the subject-object synthesis. We want to know objectively whether the student understands the content of what they're learning. And equally, we want to know their subjective experience in relationship to what they've learned. So we want prose, but we also want poetry. We want clear intellectual analysis and discernment. And we also want emotional intelligence, spiritual growth and development, and then how they're going to actually take this learning of the left brain and the right brain out into the world. That to us is the deepest learning. And I would be willing to bet a serious amount of money that if the entire global educational system was predicated on truth, beauty, the interior development, and how you engage in the world for good, most of the problems that currently afflict our world would disappear.
Amen to that. Yes, absolutely. And how did how did that go? In terms of developing that university, which seems to be quite at odds with the I suppose, the mainstream view on what it means
Well,
to develop someone academically.
yeah, we've been small. We have a couple hundred students formally in the university and another 500 or 600 that take our courses as auditors. So for their own personal benefit, not for academic credit. We have probably 25, 30 academic partners around the world. We are trundling along, doing God's work, as it were. But the current scientific paradigm and the current educational models are so firmly entrenched in the culture, they're not going to change easily,
Right.
and they're not going to change quickly. They would rather go down with the ship than to engage in any kind of meaningful change.
Right.
So the scientific reductionist model is that we're in an inert, lifeless, randomly selected universe, that consciousness is an epiphenomena of the brain, if it exists at all, and that everything is governed by random selection and chance in a mechanistic universe. And that mentality reduces learning to just memorizing facts and nothing but the facts, man.
Right.
And that's the tragedy of learning. And some people are really good at it, and some people will just can't cope with it at all and are destroyed by it.
Right. Well, maybe that's a good question. So okay. So you're teaching people with a different set of precepts, right? Other than the sort of materialist paradigm. How how does the current paradigm harm people, and what what are the benefits of developing people in the way that you've just described at Ubiquity University?
The current paradigm, to put it really succinctly, creates psychopaths and sociopaths. That's why we're on the verge of destroying ourselves.
Mm,
We've so decimated the environment that climate change is spinning out of control and the human race could go extinct if we're not careful. We're engaging in genocide in Palestine, the United States and Israel, supported by the United Kingdom and other European nations. At every level of human affairs, there's turbulence and instability to a significant degree because of the educational model and the scientific paradigm that has gripped the world. And I would say neoliberal capitalism.
right.
Now, let me unpack that. You look at the mechanistic view of the universe, scientific reductionism. If you look at the turbulence in human affairs, if you look at neoliberal capitalism, they're devoid of ethics. As soon as you take ethics out of any equation, you unleash atavistic forces that are destructive. The reason why we're destroying the planet's ecology is because we have no value on the earth. We think we can exploit anything for any amount of profit, including people. We treat people like we treat the planet, like we treat the animals.
Mm,
Look around the world. That is a economic, political, and educational system that denies the reality of value. That's why Plato is so important,
right.
because you got to know what's true. You also have to know, let the truth in to transform who you are into something more beautiful. And then you have to take that consciousness out into the world. And the scientific paradigm and the educational system is only about what's objectively, measurably true. They're not interested in your spiritual development. God knows they're not interested in any values. So if you take those apart, you end up where we are.
But
So,
wouldn't
I
the
mean,
leaders of go on, sorry.
go ahead.
No, but wouldn't the leaders of many of the academic institutions who are wedded to this other worldview will say, well, we have values, we value diversity, we value inclusion, we value learning. Uh, they would presumably say they do have a set of ethics that they adhere to.
Well, I don't think diversity and inclusion are values.
Okay.
Love is a value. Doing good to others is a value. The cultivation of beauty is a value. And I would say that diversity can also be an affirmative value and inclusion in terms of building community. But what one needs to instill in the student interior is a value proposition oriented around the good. And remember, this is what Adam Smith said in his Wealth of Nations. He says that the free market would be destructive if it wasn't integrated with morality.
Mhm.
But that was not implemented by the capital class.
No.
They eliminated all that.
Yeah.
So you end up with Boesky in the 1980s saying greed is good because there's nothing left on the table except vices. When you eliminate that, and if you have diversity and inclusion around greed, you're just going to get more diverse mechanisms of greed. I mean, look at the people that come out of Harvard Business School. They're sociopaths.
Mm.
They have no value system. They have no care for the environment. They only are trained to maximize shareholder profit. And you see what's going on in the world.
Right.
So it's very important to begin the cultivation of these values, these soft skills,
Yeah.
as now called. And let me just bring in one of the motivating factors for Ubiquity University, for Peter and I and the other people that came in to co-found Ubiquity University. It was an IBM study. And the IBM study, I can't quite remember the exact numbers, but they interviewed something like 1,700 CEOs and 3,500 students from all over the world, something like 60 countries. And the conclusion was that there wasn't a single educational institution that was preparing young people. This was back in 2010. There wasn't a single educational institution, Richard, that was preparing young people to cope and navigate through hypercomplexity.
Mm.
And what they concluded was that the left brain learning, just the facts that you can prove within the constraints of time, space, and causality, were completely inadequate for hypercomplexity. What's required for hypercomplexity is what IBM called the soft skills. Remember all of
Yeah.
this stuff about the soft skills? Well, that's what we would call values. That's critical thinking, leadership, social awareness, a sense of justice, leadership skills. If you look at the soft skills, they're all right brain skills,
Right.
right? When you start to train for the right brain skills, you don't memorize as much information, but you have a container of value. Back to
Mm.
Adam Smith. The free market is fine as long as it's contained within a value proposition oriented around the common good. You take that away, and it doesn't matter how much diversity you have. It doesn't matter what country you're in. It doesn't matter who's CEO. It doesn't matter who's on the board. Greed is good because greed's the only thing on the table.
Right.
So what we've been teaching are the soft skills.
Yeah.
We want people to know objectively what's true, but we want them also to know how to evaluate what's true.
Hmm.
Because if I don't have a way to evaluate data coming in, I'm going to be controlled by the data. That's the problem with AI. AI is just out there being created without any value proposition. And as Jeffrey Hinton and others have been telling us, we're going to go off the cliff, ladies and gentlemen. You can't do that.
Well, AI is like,
Survive.
it's like left brain on steroids, it seems to me.
Yeah, it's left brain on steroids and with an IQ 10 times greater than the geniuses of the human race.
Yes.
And that's why it's such a dangerous proposition. So anyway, Ubiquity, it's taught soft skills, interior journey, the subject-object synthesis, and the students love it. The most consistent thing we're told by graduates is that this has been among the most transformational and wonderful experience in their life because we're trying to bring it all together. We're trying to bring it all together. And that's an exciting proposition. So, I think it's my 20th anniversary this year as president of the university, and Peter's still our chief innovation officer. And we're still having a grand time uh, deepening. And this is, I think, the important. The further out you go in our model, the further back you go.
Mm,
What's above is below.
yes.
So more and more, we're learning that everything we think we're bringing out that's new into the world actually was done by the ancients and the indigenous peoples thousands and thousands of years ago.
Right.
So as Plato said, all knowledge is actually a remembering.
Remembering. Yeah.
That knowledge, he said, is not about facts. Knowledge is about your awareness of the world through what you remembered.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful notion.
It's a beautiful notion. I mean, this is what it comes to. It's like we're putting the soul at the center
Yeah.
of the educational development.
Yeah.
That's what's coming to me.
Yeah.
But I guess one tension's in my mind then. How on earth do you evaluate a student, right? How can you evaluate the quality of their or of their inner state or the progress they've made in cultivating beauty on the inside?
Well, the first thing I would say is you don't apply left brain criteria. You need to trust. You need to honor without diminishing your standards. So, for example, in our PhD, our dean of graduate studies is a woman named Dr. Georgie Szabo. She took her PhD at the Sorbonne. She's smart. She's capable. She has developed, I would say, one of the best PhD programs in the world. I would put our PhD program against Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford, any university in the world. You got to use in our case, the APA model. Footnotes have to be right. Bibliography has to be right. You have to have a literature review. You got to, all the stuff you could do for a PhD. And you got to tell us how you have processed this in terms of your interior. Some people do better jobs than others, as is the case in any endeavor. But, we honor art. We honor poetry. We honor videos, music. so that the students have a way of expressing, and we're not judging that other than by how well they're expressing themselves.
Right. Yeah.
But when you balance that against the left brain side, footnotes, bibliography, content analysis, et cetera, et cetera, the right brain expressive modalities are commensurately creative.
Yeah. Got it.
It's really amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. I think what it brings to mind, I went to a lecture a few years back. I won't name them, but this was a prominent figure in complexity science. And I asked him, to what extent, you know, as all of your study on complex systems helped you to transform as an individual. And the answer was not a jot. There'd been no personal transformation as a result of this person's dedication to studying complex systems for a couple of decades. I came out of that chat, I thought, what the heck? What? Hey, like, well, what's it all for then?
Yeah. Yeah. What's it all about, Ralphie?
So if it's not helping the individual to elevate or transform in some way, why are we doing it?
See, and it becomes potentially lethal when that individual who hasn't been prepared with any moral grounding finds themselves in a political situation of duress.
Hmm.
They don't know how to understand what's going on. And therefore, they don't know how to respond constructively in a way that preserves basic human values and constitutional rights and procedures. I mean, this is part of what's going on in the UK. I mean, the Keir Starmer government is one of the worst governments you've ever had. It's in the process of imploding.
Hmm.
But the public isn't equipped to really understand what's going on. At the United States, it's even worse. We're in the middle of a coup d'etat. We're in the middle of an authoritarian takeover. And most people are sleepwalking because they're not educated to understand reality in the deepest sense of that term, so that they're focused on keeping their job. They're focused on privatistic interests, and they've lost track of the common good because they've been educated out of even knowing that it exists. You come out of Harvard Business School, you have no sense of the common good. You have no sense of the rights of nature.
Hmm.
You have no sense of the rights of communities for self-preservation and sovereignty. That doesn't even equate.
Yeah.
So education is foundational to a culture. And ubiquity, we're doing our little bit to further these ancient truths and practices in a way that's accessible to people, is affordable to people, and which is designed to transform lives.
I don't know what is bringing to mind. I was recently listening to a guy, E.M. Burlingame. He's done sort of study into the old feudal systems and aristocracies and how and the noblesse oblige, right? This idea that part of the role of the lord, in particular feudal patch, was to preserve the commons. Like they were there to stand for the common man, and part of it was to preserve the common land that such that all of the people in the fiefdom had the opportunity to make a living, to sustain themselves. They had a place where they could grow crops and graze there. And so, and the whole community system, with this hierarchy and so on, um, had at its core mutual support, right? At least this is, perhaps that's romanticized, but at least this was the argument being laid out. And that was taken away when the merchant class began to rise, And the lords, in order to sort of keep up with their merchant peers, started to sell off the commons. And this was, this was the sort of the destruction of that way of life and large swathes of the aristocracy. This is certainly true in Britain, I'm sure in other places. And it and that to me is an example of the financialization of culture and how it can destroy communities, and the loss, certainly in the aristocratic class, of this sense of noblesse oblige, the sense of the need to operate within a set of virtues tied to the preservation and the well-being of the communities that they were leading.
Yeah. Well, just to deepen this point, I'd like to lay out something for you and your viewers to ponder. Because if you look at what's true in our world, at one level, at the level of the zeitgeist, virtually nobody knows what's going on anymore. You ask almost anybody what's going on, and nobody that I know can tell you. People are fractalized, they're split, there's fake news, nobody knows what to believe anymore, nobody trusts the government, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories. People have lost the meaning framework. So we're putting together, Ubiquity University is a sponsor of a conference that's coming up in December called the State of the World Forum. And what we're putting forth is the following: that in our world today, there are 4 things that one can say are true, no matter who you are or where you are. Number 1, it's true that we're all facing accelerating planetary ecological collapse. That's just obvious. Doesn't matter whether you believe in climate change or you don't believe in climate change. Look at the ecology. Look at the oceans. Look at the water tables and the water supplies. We're in a state of accelerating collapse. Number 2, everywhere, turbulence and instability characterize every level of human affairs. The Gen Zs, 70% of the Gen Zs say that we're doomed. Every category of mental, emotional, physical duress, not only among the young people, but among the older people, is escalating. Turbulence, chaos rules. And number 3, in the middle of all that, we've unleashed exponential, unregulated artificial intelligence based on the same premise that's led to ecological devastation and social and geostrategic, political, and economic instability. And number 4, the kicker, is the U.S. government is telling the world that technologically advanced non-human intelligence exists on Earth. This is the UFO phenomenon, UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena. They're here, folks. There's zero doubt. So how do we connect those dots, Richard? So then on the one hand, the human race is at as dysfunctional a point as it's ever been in its history, such that we're about ready to bring the ecology down on top of our heads. We've unleashed artificial intelligence. And the ETs are here. So if you think about that for a moment, what you realize is that there are 4 intelligences that we're dealing with here. We have human intelligence, we have nature intelligence, we have artificial intelligence, and we have cosmic intelligence. So how you connect those dots, how humanity in this moment of duress, for all the reasons we talked about at the beginning of this program, comes to grips with what we now need to do to save ourselves, nothing less than a new paradigm will suffice to save us. So the interactivity between human intelligence and nature intelligence, artificial intelligence, and cosmic intelligence is, in my view, what's up for humanity. You know, when I was at Cambridge, I learned Latin and Greek so I could study those ancient texts, right? We now need to learn clairvoyance. We now need to learn mental telepathy, because the only way to communicate with other sentient beings in nature, whether it's your pets or a tree or a flower or dolphin, is through mental telepathy. Everybody who's talked with an ET has communicated through mental telepathy.
Right.
So that's what's up for humanity, is learning the language of consciousness, what I call the mother tongue, right? So this is another very important aspect of all of us to understand. I talked about hypercomplexity back, the IBM study, the CEO study done in 2010. Hypercomplexity is a situation where complexity complexifies on steroids, and one complexity kind of starts to feed on another complexity, and pretty soon the whole world is spinning out of control. As has been said, things are getting better and better, worse and worse, faster and faster.
Mm.
And that's our world. And so what Ubiquity University is engaging in now, having spent the last 20 years developing soft skills, how do we teach people to learn the language of consciousness? How do we teach remote viewing, mental telepathy? How do we teach people prescience? How do we teach people how to intelligibly communicate, not just commune with the sunset, not just commune with nature because you take a walk in the forest? We can all do that. But can you engage in intelligible communication with the tree? Because the tree is capable of talking to you if you can learn clairvoyance. And every single one of us has the faculty of clairvoyance. So if you're interested in this, go to stateoftheworld.forum. You can also go to ubiquityuniversity.org on our extraterrestrial studies program. You'll see all kinds of courses. But I really want to encourage all your listeners to go to stateoftheworld.forum, because it's going to be aired as a live global broadcast December 14 through 17. And I'm telling you, it's going to blow everybody away, because it's about launching a global initiative around what we're calling the multi-intelligence revolution. And what makes it so exciting, Richard, is it depicts a future we can all fall in love with. Because it's not an ideological future where someone has to win and someone has to lose. It's just inviting humanity at this moment to learn a new language. We're really good at languages, we humans. And to start bringing nature intelligence and cosmic intelligence into the conversation about the human future.
Mm.
AI is going to play a huge role. And AI may destroy us, as Jeffrey Hinton, the Nobel Prize winner, has told us. He's the godfather of AI. He says it's out of control, ladies and gentlemen. But if you start to integrate AI into nature intelligence and cosmic intelligence, all of a sudden you've got something really interesting
Mm.
and ultimately benign, because nature is here to help.
Yes.
And everything that we know about the extraterrestrial beings, the non-human intelligences, whatever you want to call them, is that they're also benign. they're here out of concern. So, there's a lot of information in what I just said, but
There's
it's
an
it's
awful lot.
very exciting.
And I'm at the point now where I'm open to all of it, right? And partly as a function of this podcast, it's just expanded my mind, progressively. And actually, we recently had somebody who trains in animal telepathy, and she said 100% of the 100% of the people who come and do her course end up chatting with their horses or whatever pets, which blows my mind, right? And that really does speak to your point about we've all got this ability. But for the guy or girl who's hates the job, they come home, they're having a beer or what, they're zoning out to Netflix, and they listen to this. It's like everybody can learn telepathy, and we can all connect to the tree or the extraterrestrials. What's the first step out of the materialist paradigm? For most people.
I think the first step is both curiosity and an awareness that there's got to be more to life than this. Doing your job, having a beer, and then watching Netflix. Come on, man. We are so much more than that. Instead of having a beer and looking at Netflix, go to YouTube and put in how to learn clairvoyance, and you'll get dozens of courses.
Right.
The reality is how you interpret the silence. I mean, we're finding people. In fact, we're going to be rolling out courses all through 2026, inviting people to learn the language of consciousness, learn how to engage in interspecies communication. And anybody can do it. We all have the faculty. Just think of how we all have pets. Most of us have pets.
Yeah.
And we have a sense that our pets know what we're thinking and what we're doing. We had a cat, and every time we made the decision in our minds to take her to the vet, she would disappear.
Right.
She was reading our minds, man.
Well, we're having to give my kitten eye drops at the moment, and whenever I pick it up, and I know we're going to give it the eye drops, she starts squealing.
Yeah. They know they're clairvoyant. But just imagine if we could be clairvoyant and you could say, just with your mind, sweetie, it's okay. we're here to help.
I mean, I am doing that now. I've prepared to publicly admit that I am now attempting to connect to
Good for you.
animals in my mind. I've not yet had a reply, I have to say. I haven't had the voice yet back, but the voice back yet. But yeah, maybe it'll come.
But it comes. It comes with practice, and it comes with diligence. But that's what's up for humanity. That's the next phase, we believe, of human growth and development. Because if not, we're likely to do irreparable damage to the Earth ecosystem and destroy civilization as we know it, certainly, if not a good percentage of the human race. And that would be a very sad thing.
But wouldn't the pushback to that, Jim, be that throughout history, humans, we've always had the Armageddon story. It seems to be there's always a story that somehow binds us. That the end of the world is soon, and it's changed over time. And we're just in the current phase. And right now for humanity, it's AI and climate change. But wind the clock a couple of decades, and it'll probably be something else.
Um, it is true. Certainly in the Western civilizational tradition, going back to the origins of Christianity 2,000 years ago, there's been an apocalyptic end of the world stream. But that's been at the mythological and theological level. Our generation is the first generation where theological categories of apocalypse are fusing, are conflating with scientific data that it's in fact probabilistically the case. Let me give you two examples. Up until 1945, every human being lived with the certainty of his or her own personal death, but no one conceived of species death. Not really.
Hmm.
And then the United States dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and now everybody, you, me, everybody knows that not only are we going to die personally, but there's the possibility, if not the probability, that we're going to go into a thermonuclear exchange. And as you know, the dangers of nuclear exchange now are more extenuated than at any time since the beginning of the nuclear age, including the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists had the clock at 7 minutes to midnight for the Cuban Missile Crisis, and now it's 89 seconds to midnight. Okay? That's no joke. That's real, folks. And then there's climate change. I mean, thousands of climate scientists are telling us if we allow the global temperatures to go above 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels, we're going to spin out of control. The carbon dioxide in the environment and the temperatures of the earth are going to spin out of control. And if you look back over planetary history, you can see what happens when temperature increases spin out of control. There's mass extinctions, right? We humans live in a very delicate balance between, you know, oxygen and nitrogen in the atmosphere and how much we breathe and the percentages we breathe. You knock that out by just a millimeter or two, we die. So not only are we threatening each other with thermonuclear war, we're so decimated the planetary ecology that it's disrupting right in front of us as we're spewing gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere in a completely promiscuous, pornographic way. The human race has put more CO2 into the atmosphere more quickly than at any time in the last 4.5 billion years. So when we talk about apocalypse, sure, it's been around, but our generation is the first generation in entire history of our species where it could actually happen.
Right. Right. According to, you know, a great number of scientists, of course, but there are dissenting voices for all of those narratives.
Yeah, and they're all funded by the petroleum industry.
Okay.
Nobody, no, Richard, I really need to underscore this point. It's like, all those scientists that told you back 40, 50 years ago that smoking was good for you?
Right.
When they did the postmortem, virtually all of them were funded by the cigarette industry. The same thing with, what's going on now with climate change. That the industry creates its science. I mean, they support entire departments at universities and they tell them what they want the research is in. And most of it is completely fraudulent. That's common knowledge. So I think when we say certain things are true, we can play the devil's advocate and say, well, there's some people that said da da da. But that we need to know why they're saying that. And we need to be very careful not to compromise the integrity of what we're asserting uh, as the case, because all the empirical evidence points in that direction. Right?
Right. Well, I mean, I don't want to turn this into a climate change because it's not like I've got a body of evidence here that but I am familiar with, voices on both sides of that debate. And some of them I find, to be to be credible in their own right, to have validity in their own right. You know, um, but yeah, it's not. And I'm not saying I've got a clear view either way, right? But I'm just
Yeah, but I'm just saying, you need to have a clear view on this, just like you need to have a clear view on thermonuclear weapons. That's what I did my PhD on.
mm,
I asked the question, why is it that after billions of years of evolutionary life on planet Earth, our species and our generation has brought the entire life process to the brink of extinction through thermonuclear war? And when I went around asking people, listen, let's talk about it. Most people didn't even want to talk about it.
mm,
And then the people that did were willing to talk about it says, of course we need nuclear weapons because of the Russians. I said, wait a minute. We need to completely destroy the world scores of times over because we don't like somebody. And then I went to Russia and I realized one of the most astonishing revelations of my life. We didn't need weapons of mass destruction because the Russians were so bad. We needed the Russians to be bad because we needed to justify our nuclear weapons. You have weapons of mass destruction, you need a big boogeyman out there. Or else the public says, so why do we need these? So part of what we all need to be engaging in here, it seems to me, is what Mikhail Gorbachev used to call ruthless realism. You know, that there's certain things that are true here and that we need to defend those truths in a world where we're being told that nothing is true. And when you can convince people that nothing is true, that's the origin of totalitarianism. This isn't just me saying it. This is Hannah Arendt
mm.
and her great masterwork on totalitarianism. I mean, you look at the origins of fascism and what the fascists do, the Trumps of the world, the Hitlers of the world, is you destroy any basis for truth, number one. And number two, you isolate people through fear. And wherever you see that happening, those are the seeds of totalitarianism. I would encourage everybody to read Hannah Arendt under current world circumstances. I mean, where you are in the UK, man, they're arresting people by the droves who are just holding up a little sign saying free Palestine. They're going to jail.
Right, but it's happening. There is definitely a rise of authoritarianism on both sides. You know, whether or if you're yeah, you know, you're tweeting against the government about immigration right now. You know, yeah, I could be thrown in dry. So there's, you know, I think absolutely you're right, but you're absolutely right. Um, but this idea of ruthless, but that dogmatism isn't that if I say this is the truth, you know, whatever it might be, this is the truth. Is that not at some level closing me from connection with other humans?
No, it is opening them up to with an invitation to join. I mean, you know, whether it's Martin Luther King talking about civil rights, he didn't come into Birmingham, Alabama in 1963 and say, you know, I don't want to offend anybody, but I just have this idea that Black people should have civil rights. But if you don't agree with me, it's fine. He said, no, all men are created equal, period. And I'm willing to put my body down in front of this bulldozer or whatever it is that he did for civil disobedience and take a stand. That's what Gandhi did. That's what Nelson Mandela did. History is moved by people who take a stand. Remember Martin Luther, 1517, nailed a 95 Theses on the door of the church there in, what was it, Wittenberg or someplace. And he was hauled up, and they did everything they could to change his mind. And he had to take it in, and he went back to his cell overnight. And then he came back the next morning, and what was his first word?
I don't know.
He said, "Here I stand.
You're right. Yeah.
I can do no other."
Mm.
When you're willing to take a stand on what you know to be true, whether it's Galileo or Copernicus, or the great scientists who didn't submit to the church, you're not being, you're being dogmatic, but you're exemplifying, in my view, one of the highest virtues that there is, where there's complete coherence between what you think and what you say and what you do.
Okay. So this is good. So okay, so if I'm somebody who believes that CO2 is the problem and that we're heading off a precipice with climate change, and we all need, the rest of the world needs to work out I up to this and change their behaviors, and I stand on that, and I believe this is the truth. And I've got, so this is person A, and person B says this is not true. Anthropomorphic climate change is a hoax. Um, yeah, elevated levels of carbon dioxide are not causing a major issue, and I stand on that. Right, so we've got these two positions, and they both believe that they have the truth. How do we resolve that at the societal level?
Well, this happened during the civil rights movement. You remember George Wallace? He was the governor of Alabama, man, and he's what did he say? Segregation now, segregation forever. Bull Connor with his attack, the German Shepherd attack dogs. Sicking them on the crowds that Martin Luther King. So that's normal that you have A and B, and sometimes you can have C and D,
Hmm.
right? That's why democracy is so important to preserve. And because within a democratic framework, as happened in the United States in the 1960s, eventually, after many Black people died and were jailed and were scarred and were traumatized, the conscience of the American public was activated, and the civil rights legislation was passed that gave the next level of freedom to people of color in the United States. It's now under attack again. So when you stand for truth, it doesn't mean that you're actually participating in the polis. The question is, are you going to get into the arena or not?
Right.
And if you get into the arena, you realize that it's a contact sport.
Yes.
It's a contact sport, but that's the polis. That's why Aristotle said it's the participation in the polis, your community, that is both the battleground and the common ground for society. I wish we were in a world where the climate guy and the anti-climate change guy could hammer it out, but we're not. There's no real debate because the corporate interests and the political interests so dominate the media and dominate the political process that we don't have real debates in this country or in your country. I mean, look at even what's in terms of the genocide.
Right.
They
That's another example.
immediately identified genocide as hate speech. And can I dwell on this for a moment? Because this is really important in terms of education. Hate speech. All of a sudden, if it's hate speech, you're not allowed to talk about it, and you're going to go to jail, right?
Right.
That's what they did with COVID. Anybody who questioned the orthodoxy of the vaccines was stripped out of social media and denied a voice. Right?
Right.
So what's happening in the terms of the manipulate and what they've just done in the United States, the Zionists and the pro-Israel lobby have gone in and basically bought up the media.
Right.
So even though the genocide continues, it's not on the news because they're not interested in democracy. They're interested in the United States giving full 100% support to whatever it is that Israel decides it wants to do in terms of the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians from Palestine as it builds greater Israel. So part of taking a stand is not only in terms of what you're saying, but also in terms of taking a stand for democracy. Because the reality is, in my view, the reality is that if there was an open debate about the genocide going on in Palestine, there isn't a single government or people in the world that would countenance it for the next more than the next 5 minutes. The reason why the genocide continues and the reason why the Keir Starmer government continues to support Israel is by denying free speech, is by denying the capacity of the polis to have a meaningful conversation. If there had been a meaningful conversation about COVID, we'd have had a completely different outcome.
Right.
So that's why it's important to take stands, in my view, is to open up that democratic process.
Right. But we're calling, it sounds like we're calling for two things. We're calling for the ability to make a stand, but also the ability to tolerate voices who are opposed, have the absolute opposite position to you.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. Let me just
Yeah.
interject something. Very important. For free speech to mean anything, Richard, you have to allow hate speech,
Yeah.
or it's not free speech. Remember Voltaire, I disagree completely with what you're saying, and I will defend to the death your right to say it. There was a big famous case coming out of Muskogee, Illinois in the 1960s, I believe, where the Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan went into a Jewish neighborhood that had been populated by Holocaust survivors. I mean, it was classic, and had a march. And the Jewish leader says, you can't do this. This is hate speech. You can't do this. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court of the United States of America says, yes, that's the essence of free speech. Now, you can't, engage in free speech that causes harm. Like, the classic case, you can't shout fire, fire in a crowded theater, right?
Right.
Because people would get hurt. But if you're just exercising your free speech, you're just holding up that little sign saying free Palestine, it could say anything on that placard, including in the United States. The Americans traditionally have been free to burn the flag. We can even call for the overthrow of the U.S. government. That's what free speech is.
Right.
And if you say, well, you can have free speech, but you can't do hate speech, and we're defining what hate speech is, ladies and gentlemen, there's no free speech.
Yeah.
So it's these kinds of conversations that are the essence of both democracy and education.
Yeah. And it seems to me that this is central to what we're talking about here in terms of building a society of connection, is this ability for me to participate in the polis, to know my truth, to stand for it vehemently. It seems to me you've got a couple of very clear positions, one on nuclear bombs and another on climate change, and to be able to listen. I mean, this feels like the evolution is to listen with an open heart to somebody who has got the exact opposite view.
Yeah, and the purpose of the government is to ensure that when you and I disagree, we shake hands when it's over and go have a beer.
Mm.
That this is the essence of democracy. This is the Magna Carta, man. It's gone back all the way to Athens. This ability of free people to engage in full-hearted debate about the things that matter to them, honoring all the different points of view, because we're all like the blind men and the elephant.
Right.
You think it's the trunk and I think it's the tail. Okay, let's talk about it. And let's bring in somebody who thinks it's a leg or an ear, right? That's what increases the wisdom. And that's that truth, beauty, and goodness. This is what increases the wisdom of the collective.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And is there a sense that holding positions is a kind of manifestation of the ego, right? It's like I've done my left brain thing. I've analyzed it. I've got the data, and this is the truth. And now, and I'm go- I'm is that at some level, an expression of the ego? And is there a level beyond that where all of that becomes immaterial and we're
No,
just
it's not the left
super
brain.
above?
The left brain does not take the stand.
Right.
The right brain does.
Mm.
The heart does. Remember what Martin Luther King said? He said, it's not until you're willing to die for something that you begin to live. That's a heart thing. That's not a brain thing.
Yeah.
When Martin Luther King came back the next morning and said, here I stand, I can do no other, that wasn't his brain. That was his heart.
Right.
With Giordano Bruno, burned at the stake in 1600 for just talking about the fact that the sun wasn't the center of the universe and that there was probably millions of other life forms out there. They burnt the guy to the stake. So, it's precisely honoring the opposite. What Jung calls the antinomial nature of reality, where he says you have two internally consistent, mutually exclusive truths. And he says the key is to understand that the opposite of a truth is not a falsehood. The opposite of a truth is another great truth.
Yeah.
And then once you get that, then the dialogue becomes exciting and dynamic. And we've completely lost that capacity, I think, because we've turned our educational systems into deserts.
Yeah. Recently met the next great truth.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you bring those truths together, it's Hegel, right? You get the thesis and the antithesis, you get a higher synthesis, what Ken Wilber in Integral Theory calls transcend and include. But you can't transcend and include unless you include.
Right. And so to use the example of the climate change, right, there's the person who thinks it's a problem and it's anthropomorphic, and then there's the guy who thinks it's not. There's another truth above that includes both.
Yeah, and that's democracy. That's called democracy. And then even better, I don't have to change my mind. You don't have to change your mind. Let's take a vote.
Right. Well, that's not the same thing. That's just letting
And
what's up.
then
Weird.
people
That's finding another truth above.
Yeah, but that's how democracy muddles along is by uh, um, honoring the diversity of opinions and then letting the people in their discernment, having heard the debate, to make decisions.
Yeah.
And then that's, like Churchill, like the democracy was the worst form of government except for all the others, right? It's inefficient, it's cumbersome, but in the long run, the more you're informing people, the more you're allowing debate and free exchange, the whether it's hate speech or whatever kind of speech, the better off people are. Because in the end, as Abraham Lincoln noted, a government of the people, for the people, and by the people shall long endure. Because there's a wisdom. I mean, just look at this interchange between you and I today. It's been beautiful. And I think your audience will be blessed because people are actually talking intelligently and interactively with one another. There's a certain euphoria that happens when people get to experience kind of reality.
Yeah.
Rather than manipulation and propaganda and the machinations of social control.
I had a guy on who's obviously 17th generation samurai warrior. And he talked about when there's a tradition in samurai fighting where before they go into battle, knowing that one must die, uh, they they each write half of the poem. So the one warrior writes half, and then the other one completes the poem, and then they join it together, and the poem goes to the family of the dead fighter.
Love it.
And that's something like what we're talking about here, right? There's a higher beauty to this interchange, right? This thrashing it out that when we engage in it, we can both kind of be conscious of that there's something beyond this
Yeah.
climate change or not climate change, right? There's more beautiful that's
Yeah.
that's there.
Yeah. 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 Cool. Well, thank you. What a great discussion. I've appreciated this. This is Ubiquity University. This is the State of the World Forum, folks. This is where it's all coming together.
This is beautiful, yeah. Okay, there's so much we could have got. Yeah, I want to honor you.
Next time.
This is we didn't even get into the UFOs and all of the supernatural skills that we can develop. But wonderful. Thank you, Jim. This has been enlightening. This has been, euphoric. I feel energized. So if this is a taste of what Ubiquity University has to offer, then what a pleasure it must be for your students and I.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the State of the World Forum, if you guys really want a conversation of a lifetime, go to stateoftheworld.forum to experience the multi-intelligence revolution.
I love it.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Jim. We'll get all the links out there. And can't wait to get this conversation out to the world.
All right. Be well.
Thank you.